You weren't invited, Evelyn. This is a VIP reception, my father whispered, adjusting the collar of his suit jacket. His voice carried that familiar, condescending tone I had heard my entire life. Beside him, my brother, Marcus, smirked, holding a gold-embossed guest pass. They had managed to get tickets through one of Marcus's corporate sponsors, and they were parading around the Pentagon's grand reception hall as if they owned the building. I stood a few feet away, dressed in my Navy service dress white uniform. I didn't have a gold pass in my hand. I only had a small security clearance card. You should probably leave before security asks for your papers, Marcus sneered, looking at my uniform. We wouldn't want you embarrassing Dad in front of the executives. I didn't answer. I simply walked up to the check-in counter and handed my military ID to the young hostess. She swiped the card through the scanner. Instantly, her computer screen flashed with a bright red notification. The hostess froze. She looked at the screen, then at my uniform, then back at the screen. Her hand trembled as she picked up her radio. Sir, the primary guest has arrived at Checkpoint Alpha. A few yards away, General Raymond, a decorated 4-star Marine Corps general, stopped talking to a group of politicians. He turned immediately, his eyes scanning the lobby. When he spotted me, he walked directly toward us. My father's smile faltered. He straightened his posture, thinking the general was coming to greet him. He extended his hand. General, it's an honor. But General Raymond walked right past my father. He stopped in front of me, stood at attention, and delivered a crisp, formal salute. Commander Evelyn Vance, the general said, his voice echoing in the quiet lobby. It's an honor to have you here tonight. The Joint Chiefs are waiting for you in the inner briefing room. My father's hand hung in midair. He blinked in utter confusion, his face pale. Beside him, Marcus's smirk vanished. Thank you, sir, I replied, returning the salute. As I walked past them, guided by the general, the memories I had spent decades trying to forget came rushing back. Because moments of recognition like this don't start at the Pentagon. They begin in the dark, silent corners of a childhood where you were always second best. My name is Evelyn Vance. I am 38 years old, and I am a commander and search and rescue helicopter pilot in the United States Navy. If you met me today, you would see a woman with a calm voice, steady hands, and the quiet authority that comes from flying multi-million-dollar aircraft into storms. But for the first 18 years of my life, I was completely invisible. I grew up in a coastal town in Maryland. My father, Richard Vance, was a high school athletic director. He was a proud man, but his pride had a very narrow focus. That focus was my younger brother, Marcus. From the day Marcus was born, he was my father's chosen successor. Marcus was a natural athlete, tall, fast, and popular. My father spent every weekend coaching his little league teams, driving him to travel tournaments, and talking about his future NFL career. I remember bringing home my 8th grade report card. I had earned straight A's and won the regional science fair. I walked into the living room where my father and Marcus were watching a football game. Dad, look, I said, holding up my certificate. I won first place. My father didn't even look away from the screen. That's nice, Evelyn. Go put it in your room. Then, he slapped Marcus on the back. Did you see that throw, buddy? You're going to be doing that next year in high school. I stood there, the paper trembling in my hand, before quietly walking down the hallway. Our living room wall was a shrine to Marcus. It was covered in his football trophies, framed newspaper clippings of his high school games, and photos of him and my father smiling on the field. There wasn't a single picture of me. When relatives came over, my father would spend an hour talking about Marcus's recruiting offers. If someone asked about me, my father would shrug and say, Evelyn's doing fine. She stays out of trouble. I tried so hard to be noticed. I joined the track team, graduated valedictorian, and volunteered at the local hospital. But no matter what I accomplished, it was never enough to pull my father's eyes away from his golden son. The only person who saw me was my mother, Eleanor. She was a quiet, gentle woman who spent her life trying to keep the peace. One evening, after my father had spent dinner talking about Marcus's college football prospects while completely ignoring my college acceptance letters, my mother came into my room. She sat on the edge of my bed and tucked my hair behind my ear. "You're angry," she said softly. "I'm not angry," I lied, staring at the floor. "I'm just tired." She squeezed my hand. "Your father has a blind spot, Evelyn. He thinks the only way to be successful is to be loud and standing on a field. But he's wrong. You have a quiet strength inside you. One day, you will show them who you really are." I wanted to believe her, but it felt like the kind of empty comfort mothers always give. I didn't know then how prophetic her words would become. When I was 17, my mother was diagnosed with a rapid, aggressive illness. Within months, the strongest, gentlest person in my life was confined to a hospital bed. I spent every free hour beside her, studying for my exams under the dim hospital lights. My father was rarely there. He was too busy driving Marcus to college recruiting visits, trying to secure a scholarship. One night, my mother reached out and took my hand. Her grip was weak, but her eyes were incredibly clear. "Promise me, Evelyn," she whispered. "Never let someone else's opinion become your destiny. You are meant for great things." "I promise, Mom," I said through my tears. She passed away 3 weeks later, just before my high school graduation. My father and Marcus were devastated, but they dealt with their grief by focusing even more on Marcus's career. When it came time for college, my father made it clear that the family savings were reserved for Marcus's athletic expenses and housing. "You can get a student loan, Evelyn," he said, not even looking up from his coffee. "Marcus needs to focus on football. He's our future." I didn't argue. I didn't beg. I walked into a Navy recruiting office the next day. The recruiter asked me why I wanted to join. I looked him in the eye and said, "I want to earn a place where my effort is the only thing that matters." I entered the Naval Academy that summer. My father didn't come to the induction ceremony. He sent a text, "Good luck. Busy with Marcus's preseason." The training at Annapolis was brutal. It pushed me to my absolute physical and mental limits. But for the first time in my life, I wasn't being measured by a father's favoritism. The Navy didn't care who my brother was. They didn't care about my family's dynamics. They only cared about my discipline, my skills, and my ability to lead. I fell in love with aviation. I wanted to fly helicopters, specifically search and rescue. I wanted to be the person who went into the places everyone else was running away from. When I earned my wings, I called my father to tell him the news. "That's nice, Evelyn," he said. "Hey, did you hear that Marcus just got signed by a semi-pro team? We're hosting a big party this weekend." I held the phone to my ear, listening to the noise of the party in the background. "I'm happy for him, Dad," I said quietly, and hung up. I realized then that I could fly to the moon, and my father would still be looking at a football field. Over the next decade, I built my career in the sky. I was deployed to the Pacific, the Mediterranean, and the Atlantic. I flew in conditions that would make most people pray for land. My job was simple but terrifying. When a ship was sinking, a civilian was lost at sea, or a military crew was downed in hostile territory, my crew and I flew in to get them out. I didn't do it for medals. I did it because of the promise I made to my mother. Every time I pulled a freezing survivor out of the dark ocean, I felt her smile. Meanwhile, Marcus's football career quickly fizzled out. A series of knee injuries and poor discipline ended his athletic dreams before they even really began. Instead of finding a stable career, Marcus began bouncing from one failed business venture to another. He opened a luxury gym that went bankrupt in 6 months, invested in high-risk stocks that crashed, and spent my father's retirement savings on business opportunities. My father rushed to rescue him every single time. He sold his house, moved into a small apartment, and took a job as a security guard to pay off Marcus's debts. I offered to help my father financially, but he refused. "I can handle it, Evelyn. Marcus is just having a run of bad luck. He's going to make it big soon. I stopped offering. I realized that my father's obsession with Marcus wasn't just favoritism anymore, it was a delusion he couldn't let go of. Then, the storm of the century hit the East Coast. It was a Category 4 hurricane that battered the Outer Banks of North Carolina. A container ship lost power 50 miles off the coast, with 15 crew members trapped on deck as the vessel began taking on water. The waves were 40 feet high, and the wind was gusting at 80 knots. Every civilian rescue service refused to fly. The risk was too high. My squadron was called. I was the mission commander. We flew our Seahawk helicopter directly into the eye of the storm. The turbulence was so violent it felt like the aircraft would tear itself apart. Through sheer determination and precision flying, we managed to hover over the pitching deck of the ship and hoist all 15 crew members to safety, one by one. On our way back, we received a distress call from a downed civilian rescue helicopter that had crashed in a flooded inland town. We had almost no fuel left, but I made the call to go back. We rescued the 4 crew members just before their aircraft was swept away by the floodwaters. It was hailed as one of the most heroic rescue missions in modern naval history. I didn't think about that. I was just glad everyone made it home. A month later, I received a large, official envelope from the Department of Defense. I had been selected for the Distinguished Flying Cross, the nation's highest military aviation award, to be presented at a special Joint Chiefs ceremony at the Pentagon. When I told my father about the ceremony, he was surprisingly eager to attend. But I knew why. He had never been inside the Pentagon, and he wanted to show off to his friends. Marcus is coming too, my father said on the phone. He needs to network with some of the government contractors there. I sighed, but I agreed. I had learned to let go of my expectations. On the day of the ceremony, I met them in the Pentagon lobby. Marcus was wearing a suit that looked too expensive for someone with no job, and my father was clutching his guest invitation like a golden ticket. "Make sure you don't wander off, Evelyn," my father said, looking around the massive lobby. "We don't want you getting lost in a secure area." "I work here sometimes, Dad," I said gently. "Yes, but this is the VIP section," Marcus sneered, waving his gold pass. "You're just a pilot. We got these tickets from a major donor." I didn't say anything. I walked up to the officer registration desk and handed my credentials to the hostess. When she swiped my card, her computer screen flashed with a high-priority alert. Her posture immediately straightened, and she spoke into her caller mic. "Command staff, Honorary Vance is at the desk." Within seconds, General Raymond and a group of high-ranking officers walked out of the VIP lounge. My father saw them coming and smiled proudly, stepping forward. "General Raymond. I'm Richard Vance, and this is my son, Marcus. We're here for..." General Raymond didn't even blink. He walked right past my father and Marcus. He stopped in front of me, stood at attention, and saluted. "Commander Vance," the general said. "We've been waiting for you. The Secretary of Defense has requested your presence in the VIP holding room before the ceremony begins." My father stood frozen, his hand still extended in the air. Marcus's jaw dropped. "Evelyn," my father stammered, looking at the general, then at my uniform. What is this?" General Raymond looked at my father, his eyebrows raised. "Sir, your daughter is the recipient of the Distinguished Flying Cross tonight. She saved 19 lives in a Category 4 hurricane. Didn't she tell you?" My father stared at me, his eyes wide. The Distinguished Flying Cross? "We need to go, Commander," the general said politely, guiding me toward the secure doors. As the heavy glass doors closed behind me, I looked back one last time. My father and Marcus were standing in the middle of the lobby, looking smaller than they ever had in my life. The ceremony was a blur of applause, speeches, and handshakes. When they read my citation, the entire room stood up. I stood on the stage, the heavy metal pinned to my uniform, looking out at the crowd. I saw my father sitting in the second row. He wasn't looking at the ceiling or his phone. His eyes were locked on me, and for the first time in my life, they were filled with tears. After the ceremony, I found him standing alone in the Pentagon's inner courtyard. Marcus had already left, unable to handle the blow to his ego. My father looked at me as I approached. He looked older, tired, and fragile. "Evelyn," he said, his voice cracking. I don't know what to say." "You don't have to say anything, Dad," I replied. "No, I do," he said, staring at the concrete. "I spent 30 years waiting for Marcus to become a hero. I invested everything in him. And the entire time, the real hero was standing right in front of me. I was so blind." He looked up, tears rolling down his cheeks. "I remember your science fair certificate. I remember ignoring you. I am so sorry, Evelyn. Can you ever forgive me?" I looked at him, and I felt the last of the anger and resentment melt away. I realized that my mother was right. My father's opinion had never defined my destiny. I had built a beautiful life despite his neglect. Holding on to the pain would only hurt me. "I forgive you, Dad," I said, stepping forward to hug him. He held on to me tightly, shaking. The next weekend, we drove to the cemetery together. The air was cool, and the sky was a brilliant blue. We walked up to my mother's grave. I took the Distinguished Flying Cross medal and placed it gently on the headstone, next to the flowers. My father stood beside me, his hand on my shoulder. He looked at the headstone, then at me. "She always knew, Evelyn," he whispered. "She told me you would show us who you were. I just wish I had listened sooner." "She knows, Dad," I said, looking up at the sky. "If you are listening to this story today, and you feel like you are standing in the shadow of someone else, remember this: the people who cannot see your light do not get to decide when you shine. Work hard, stay silent, and let your results do the talking. ****. Thank you for listening. If this story touched your heart, leave the word wings in the comments. Don't forget to subscribe, and I'll see you on the next journey.